Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Nisha Sayed and I'm a first year studying government at the college. And I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation online with the hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live and interact with our student-run Instagram at JFK Junior Forum for behind-the-scene highlights. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guest and director of the Shorenstein Center, Nancy Gibbs.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mark Guerin, the director here at the Institute of Politics, and we warmly welcome all of you to the JFK Junior Forum. This should be a really special evening. We feel very fortunate to have Tara Westover here as a guest here at the forum. She will be in conversation with Nancy Gibbs, who's the director of the Shorenstein Center. I suspect so many of us have read Educated. Show of hands.
Oh, that makes this so much easier.
This is an informed group, and of course...
I was just going to recite it, so now I don't know.
Well?
Now I don't know what we're going to talk about. I was just going to recite it, so it's...
We're okay with that. I think that would be... But of course, it's Tara's really brilliant memoir of her journey. Born to survivalists in Idaho and first stepping into a classroom at the age of 17. But I think for those of us who were fortunate to read it and really leave inspired by a zest for learning and knowledge that carried her journey to her PhD at Cambridge University, and today we're fortunate to have Tara at the Shorenstein Center at the A.M. Rosenthal, a writer in residence. So this is a special evening, and so we warmly welcome you here to the forum. No better person to be in conversation with Tara than Nancy Gibbs, who's the director of the Shorenstein Center and a former editor of Time magazine, where during years as a great reporter, she authored more cover stories than any other person, 175 cover stories. So she is well prepared to interview and to be in conversation. So how fortunate we all are. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for being here. I'm so pleased that you are as familiar with this extraordinary book as you are, because it, among other things, it allows me to take up where the writing left off.
Oh, good.
So I'd love you to just go back to the point where you had turned in a manuscript to an editor who I'm guessing did not have a lot of experience with a writer with your story. And so can you tell us a little bit about what happened between when you finished writing and then the point at which you discovered you had written one of the most important books of the year? What was that like?
When I turned in the manuscript and it was published, StarCraft happened. Yeah, only like 5 people have heard of that, but that's a computer game. Let's see. I'm trying to find what happened. You know, the book is it's a weird thing, the book, because all this stuff's happened since it was published, and that kind of colors it in some ways, and it's weird sometimes when I read it. I have 2 responses to it. On the one hand, I don't think I really understand on a subconscious level how it is that people have read it, because I wrote it on my laptop, and as far as my brain understands, it's a kind of Word document. And at some point, it got emailed to someone, and like how exactly it came to be the case that a bunch of people read it is not intuitively obvious to me. So people come up to me sometimes and tell me something from the book, and I have this reaction like, how do you know that? I didn't tell you. All right, I wrote that down. Somebody published it. So I don't know. I mean, my relationship to it is kind of the same. And the funny thing about the book is it's an artifact that was written before it was published, which sounds obvious to say, but what I mean by that is it was written, the words that are on the page were written when I was living in a kind of dingy, flooded flat in London, and that hasn't changed. That is the thing that was just kind of written, and everything that's happened since is all very weird and strange, and has almost nothing to do with the material.
Did you have an audience in mind? Like, did you imagine there was an audience of Idaho girls who had been raised in a junkyard and that went on to get a PhD? And
yeah, that was my target.
Right.
I think it's a principle of storytelling that the universal is always best explored in the specific. It's a universal principle of storytelling. However, when you're writing it, I don't think it feels that way. So I did feel at the time that I was writing it, like, this story will do really great with little girls who worked in junkyards and never went to school. They're gonna love it, and everyone else will be slightly confused by it. But I think that principle holds true, and I think not everybody is kept out of school, and not everybody has to make such difficult choices about family that I had to make, but I think everybody does struggle to some degree or another about what it means to grow up, and how do you negotiate that identity that you're having that is both defined in connection to your family, but also in counter-distinction to your family, and everybody has to find healthy boundaries with difficult people in their lives, and everybody has to work out what learning means for them. I mean, I think that there are things in it that everybody has to struggle with, maybe in a different way than I did, but I think that there are things in it that everybody does struggle with. But the answer to your question is, when I was writing it, it felt like it would be of interest to exactly me. I was the only person who fit that criteria. So it's a bit of an act of faith, I guess, writing. You are, in a way, trusting that other people will care. And it's really, really nice that people sometimes do, Thanks.
So you mentioned of sort of having people come up to you who at least feel like they know you and they know a lot about you. What is the question that you get asked the most often?
I don't know, there's a whole bunch of questions I get asked a lot. I think that I'm actually kind of different than people think I'm going to be. I'm a lot more sarcastic than people. The book is fairly sincere, I think, as books go, and then I'm not super sincere.
How'd that happen?
So I have a lot of people come up to me. I had one of my first event that I ever did, someone came up to me and said, "You're funny. You're not funny in the book." and I was like, yeah, they're totally... I am not funny in the book. That's really fair. So I think that I think it can be really jarring because you've had an experience they've experienced me, not only a version that I'm remembering and a version that I'm kind of constructing from my memories, but also a version of me that was mostly written between the hours of 12 and 3 o'clock in the morning, often with a cup of tea or sometimes something stronger than tea, in a quiet space with lovely music playing, and that's where most of this book was written. And then the real me is, this. So it's different.
You travel through
You're like, you don't know what
so
to make
many, I
of
don't know
that.
where to take that. But I'm going back to sort of 3 o'clock in the morning, and that of course takes me to the question of mental health.
Oh, thank you. How's yours? Just kidding.
It's great right now.
Yeah, I have to tell a story about that because it's funny. And what else is
Because you're funny.
Because I try to be funny. Because younger kids always try to be funny. It's the only way your older siblings will like you. And no, but I try to be really open about therapy because I think everyone should just be open about therapy, and therapy is good. And if we all just acknowledged that it's a good idea and weren't weird around it, then it wouldn't be so hard to ask for help. So whenever I go to therapy and people ask me where I've been, I always say, I was at therapy, and I congratulate myself for how open I am. And I once went out with somebody, and I met him up for a drink, and he said, "Oh, where are you coming from?" And I really arrogantly and proudly said, "Oh, I just came from therapy." And I'm trying to be open, and I was so proud, and he said, "Oh, what did you talk about?" I was like, not that open. Anyway, that's my therapy story. This is going to be a hard interview for you.
So therapy naturally takes me to
3 a.m.?
3 a.m. No, you had a really interesting idea, I thought, in a commencement speech you gave last spring about the self or the selves, and you called it your uninstagrammable self. And maybe the way we kid ourselves about which of the selves we create is the most real. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'd been doing some reading around it, and I'd read a really brilliant essay by Zadie Smith about Facebook that I think is really great. Everyone should look it up. But I was thinking about when I graduated from college, I had this really difficult experience, actually. My dad wouldn't come because he was angry that I had I didn't want him to lecture my professors for being part of the Illuminati. I really didn't think that would be nice. And he thought that was a really not okay request, and we were not moving past that concept. That conflict was not resolvable, and so he decided not to come to my graduation. And so I had my graduation, and then at the last minute my parents turned up, but they'd missed the actual ceremony. But I had this picture taken of my graduation of my parents, and we were standing there smiling and looking all normal, but the actual day was pretty rough, obviously, where they'd missed it and we were fighting, and I was moving to a foreign country. And
like the next day?
My bags were packed, like I was going to the airport, and I had never lived anywhere that wasn't majority Mormon. I was at a Mormon university. I'd been raised Mormon, and yet I no longer believed in Mormonism. I'd never met anyone who wasn't Mormon in my whole life. Someone at a checkout stand, but no one whose name I knew. So you could kind of say my life was really in tatters, or at least it was a very confusing space. And then I remember I kind of rushed home and uploaded this photo to show how I'd had a graduation that was like everybody else's graduation, and look how perfect my life is, and my parents were there to support me online. And I was kind of thinking about that as I was thinking about all the students and how much time that increasingly we spend a lot of time curating these kind of online lives, and we curate a kind of online self, and we get a lot of meaning. And I think that there can sometimes be a bit of a risk that we over-identify with the avatar that we create. And I think that there's all kinds of problems with over-identifying with your avatar, and I could probably talk about it for a really long time, but I won't. But I think some of the really potent ones are that most of the meaningful things that you will do in your life or that you'll achieve in your life will not be done by your avatar. You know, the perfect version of you that gets posted in your wedding photos is not going to be the you that falls in love. Like, you'll look different, and your happy, perfect family pictures will be nothing like what it's like to actually have children who are quite messy. And all these just parts of your life, like even a graduation, you post a graduation photo, but the you that's graduating is the one that was reading a lot of books and studying and doing a lot of very non-photographable things. So I think that there can be a slight risk in looking at the online world. And one thing about data is it always underrepresents reality. So it cannot actually capture the context of a human life. And so you kind of want to, I think, be too careful before you over-identify with that self, and especially with other people, because online people aren't allowed to change, they're not allowed to evolve, they're not allowed to be wrong, you're not allowed to make a mistake. Everything that you post on your account one day is going to be there forever. It's going to be dug up at some point and used against you. And I think that there's a lot of the best things about human beings are those capacities to create things and forgive and show mercy, and none of that exists in your online kind of avatar. That all of that is stripped away.
One reason I wonder is because it feels all through Educated that you're so careful about memory and about the possibility that you might be misremembering something, or that another member of your family might have a conflicting memory of it. And it feels like you're very scrupulous along the way at letting the reader in on the places where you're not so sure. And I wonder how that would have worked if you had had a whole lifetime's worth of Instagrams and Facebook posts to use as...
I had a whole about 30 journals, which I think are better than Instagram. You know, because as I said, that's the funny thing about my graduation is what was posted was the opposite of reality, in a way. And the journals lie in their own way. Sometimes, you know, I think we're all making meaning out of our lives as we experience it, and one of the things I did try to write about is the ways that even when I was 14, 15 years old and I was writing about the things that were happening, I was not always prepared to, I guess I would just say I wouldn't write about those things the same way now. I wouldn't use the same words. There's an incident that I describe in the book that is a kind of serious one, so there's not many jokes for a couple minutes, where I have a older brother who's pretty violent. He has some issues with violence, and I described a pretty dramatic encounter between him and me, and the chapter was about voice, and it was about memory and who gets to narrate your life. And I was thinking about this girl who at the time was 15, 16 years old, and everybody was telling her what her life meant and what had happened and reinterpreting things. And then here I was at the age of 28 writing that story. And I recorded kind of how I would describe it. And then I made this weird decision where I took the journal entry from that night and I put it in the text. And when the editors were going through it, they said, "Oh, let's take this out. It's repetitive. You already described it once. I don't want you to describe it twice. It's the definition of a repetition." And they were totally right. But I said, no, we're going to keep it. And my reasoning was just that I said, this chapter is about voice, it's about narrative, it's about who's telling stories. And she uses language to describe this event that I would not. She calls him a great big jerk. That's her interpretation of what happened. And I thought, it's about voice, it's about narrative. I should not be the one writing, not even me, she has her own way of describing this, and it's worth leaving that in. So I was trying to be conscientious about the fact that there are layers of perspectives. Even a primary source is not an unbiased source. It's not an unfiltered source. And one of the things about being a human that is so confusing but also so rich is that any person, you've got a kind of slightly neurotic situation where the writer of a book who also experienced it is like, no, I have to give way to the earlier version who experienced it even though I think her interpretation is off. And, welcome to being a human being.
You've said that writing the book actually gave you access to some good memories that maybe weren't as available to you before you started writing.
Yeah, I think I had a period with my family. I became estranged from some of my family, not from all of my family, but from some of my family. And there was definitely a period after that happened where I was very, I guess the word you'd use is angry. And I have a theory about anger. I think anger is a self-defense mechanism. I think it's something your brain uses to get you out of situations that might do you harm. But the problem with it is once you're out of that situation, it doesn't always just go away, right? Sometimes it can just grow and grow and grow and consume everything. And that's kind of what happened to me. There was a period of my life where every positive memory that I had from childhood was kind of eaten by this rage I felt. And I became someone who had no beautiful memories. And that's not a super nice way to live, actually, to have no beautiful memories. And I think one of the things writing the book did for me that I didn't expect it to do is that I was able to go back and write about some of the beautiful things, some of the nice things, and remember them. And not to say, everything was fine and it was okay, and not to whitewash it, but just to say there were lovely things. And I think one of the things I wanted to capture when I was writing it is that I think there's just a complexity of human feeling that is, I think I wanted to try to capture why some of these relationships that are toxic are so hard to walk away from. Like, why are they so compelling? And there were things that when I was becoming estranged from my family that I did not understand. I did not understand that you could love somebody and still choose not to have them in your life. I did not understand that. I thought if you loved them, that meant that you were supposed to work it out. And I thought if you did say goodbye to somebody and you missed them, that meant you'd made the wrong decision. And I didn't have the ability to understand that complexity that swirls around it, especially important relationships like family. So when I was writing it, I wanted to represent as much of both sides as I could.
You said that when people have asked about your family, the tragedy is not that bad people do bad things. The tragedy is what good people do to keep secrets.
I did say that.
Do you remember what you meant?
Oh, probably. I do. I don't think that my parents are bad people. I don't. Yeah, it's good. I don't think that they're bad people at all. I think. What do I think? Sometimes I think they're bad people, and then sometimes I think that it's just apparent to me now that they were doing the best that they could, and there's a kind of reassurance in a certain kind of fatalism where you just say that was the way it was, and I'm not going to obsess necessarily over it. I mean, I tried not to write a lot in the book in an essay way. I didn't try to tell people what it meant. I tried to make it experiential. And the only exception to that really is the last 2 pages where I try to just explain, this is how I came to peace with this. And that doesn't mean anybody else should. I'm not a psychologist, so I could be totally wrong about it. But I found that there was a lot of years after I became estranged from my family that I was obsessed with justice, and in particular with justifying my own decisions. So I felt like if I could document enough instances where my parents had been wrong or neglectful or terrible in some way, that then I would be justified in the decision I'd made to say goodbye to them, and then I wouldn't feel guilty anymore. And so I was constantly obsessed with trying to, get my stories, get all my things, get everyone to support me, get everyone on my side. And eventually, I think what I realized is that that whole thing was about my dad. It was really about them. And when I came to peace with that decision was when I stopped making it about them and just made it about myself. I wasn't walking away from my dad because he deserved it and was a terrible person and I wanted him to suffer. It wasn't that he deserved it. It was just that I needed it. That's what I needed. And so once I kind of let go of trying to justify myself, and you asked about narrative and letting in other memories, I think my parents didn't believe me about my brother. And there was a long period after that where I was an absolutist with history. My history and my memory was the only memory that was valid, and everybody else was wrong. And if you didn't subscribe to my version of history and what happened, then you were terrible. And it took me a little while and some distance to realize the solution to people not respecting your memories and your right to have your own point of view is not to then disrespect theirs. Like that's actually not the answer. And so I actually felt like it was part of respecting my own narrative and my own story to put footnotes in that said, I could be wrong about these things. I'm not going to hold myself to a standard of perfection. I don't hold other people to that standard. I don't hold myself to that standard. I'm doing the best I can, and I'm going to tell you what other people think. And ultimately, I came around to the idea that if I want other people to listen to me, I have to listen to other people. It's a bummer, but...
The beginning of this semester, you said something that has stayed with me that I think partly must have arisen from the amount of traveling you must have done over these past months. And it had to do with how urban America sees rural America and vice versa. And so I'm curious about what zip codes like this get wrong about communities like the one that you grew up in.
Most of it. Yeah, I'm comfortable with that statement. Yeah, I would say that again. Almost everything.
Like what?
I think both zip codes. We don't really think in zip codes in Idaho. There's like 5 zip codes, but we don't. Both zip codes get each other totally wrong. I think because what we get, the information that we get about each other is a caricature. It's a stripped down, reductive stereotype that has nothing to do really with what the people are like. And I think people are, and I've said this a lot tonight, like a bit of a broken record, but people are extremely complicated, and people can be capable of great acts of ignorance on the one hand and great acts of generosity on the other, and they're not one thing. And I think sometimes because we only hear a handful of facts about the other side, we think that we know everything that we need to know. If somebody drives a truck and they own a shotgun, then we think that we know everything we need to know about them. What else could we need to know, really? But you might need to know a lot. You might need to know how they've adopted kids that really need a home, or you might need to know how they're taking care of their neighbor who has cancer. There are things that might be relevant to your understanding of that person that go beyond who they voted for, and vice versa. So I just think when I'm in New York and I hear New Yorkers talking about Idahoans, I'm like, who are you talking about? I've never met those people. But I feel the same when I'm in Idaho and they're talking about New Yorkers. I just have no idea. I've never met. I'm sure they must exist, and we found all 10 of them. We put them on the news. But I just don't recognize the people. But so, I mean, what do they get wrong? I think the rural United States and the urban United States are having fundamental differences of experience with, I would say, the modern economy generally. So cities, broadly speaking, are doing pretty well. If you look at where growth is happening in the United States, it's happening in the cities. And the rural areas are, for the most part, either experiencing negative growth or stagnation, or wages that are going up, but they're not keeping up with inflation. And so like those are fundamentally, you're talking about ecosystems that are living and thriving and growing, and ecosystems that are dying. And those are very different experiences of life. So, it's a complicated thing because I never want to defend prejudice. I'm not interested in it. I don't want to do that. But I do think that there has to be a way to have a slightly more complicated understanding of people that doesn't reduce them to their worst, that old saying, the worst thing about a person is not the truest thing about them. And it has to be possible to attack prejudiced ideas without attacking human beings or reducing them to that one thing. That has to be possible. And I think it has to be possible because no one's ever been persuaded of anything by being screamed at that I'm aware of. And I have a weird, I guess, perspective on it because I have been on the wrong side of almost every issue at one point in my life. So every kind of wrong-headed, I was raised in a pretty sexist family, and I took in a lot of that. I was raised in a pretty homophobic family. I took in a lot of that. My family had some distressing ideas about race. I took a lot of that in. When I went off to college, I had a lot of objectionable ideas that I believed. And the way that I changed them was people, they dealt with me as a complete human being, and not everybody. When I went to Cambridge, I remember there were people that just turned away from me and said, I'm not going to talk to a Mormon, you're a bigot. It was 2008, and the debate about gay marriage was pretty visceral for people at the time. And some people, because I had these ideas, just would not even talk to me. And then there was one guy, his name's Andrew, and for whatever reason, Andrew stayed up all night arguing with me one night about like my second week in Cambridge. I remember I'd never met anyone who wasn't Mormon until I went to Cambridge. And so here's Andrew, and we spent all night arguing, and I said things that I would be far too embarrassed to repeat in this room, or even just worried about hurting somebody, the things that I said. And I believed. And here's this guy, and he argues with me all night, and he argued with me in a really particular way where he said to me, and so he didn't say to me, I can't believe how hateful you are, I can't believe how ignorant you are. Instead, what he said to me was this interesting thing, where he said, you seem like a good person, and how does this fit in? Like, what does this have to do with these other things that I know about you? And in a way, he kind of excised those beliefs for me a little bit, and he let me hold them at some distance.
Like who you are is not.
It's not necessarily. I'd grown up in a family where those things had been said to me since I was 4 years old. Everybody that I knew and loved thought those things. I went to BYU where they were not contradicted and they were in many ways reinforced. And he was the first person that really said to me, do you really think this? Is this how you want to go about it? And I'd been thinking about that issue and wondering about it. And the point of it is we argued for about, it's probably 5-6 hours. And I said horrible things. I didn't back down an inch because it's not in my nature to back down ever. And then I went home and I wrote the next morning probably the weirdest email that I've written in my whole life. I wrote this email. I said, Dear Andrew, it was so lovely to meet you last night. Thank you for staying up and talking with me. And I just want you to know that I thought about what you said, and you're right and I'm wrong, and hope to see you later. And and that was the message. Yeah, it was the beginning of a friendship. But he let me articulate pretty horrible things And what I discovered from that experience was that I never wanted to say those things again. I didn't really believe them, and I didn't want to say them again. And that was the beginning for me. And it was the beginning on that issue, but I'd had that issue repeated with me in many other things that I was, like I said, I've been on the wrong side of every issue. And I guess the point that I am trying to make in a long-winded way is I think education, there's a tendency in our culture right now, we're very obsessed with privilege. And all the different kinds of privileges, you need to be aware of your privilege. And I would say, in my mind at least, education is the ultimate privilege. And the fact that you have access to all these different ideas, that you're able to have right-minded ideas about things, you have to decide, what are you going to do then in the face of ignorance? And is your education going to make you arrogant? Is it going to make you persuasive? Is it going to give you the curiosity that you need to understand someone in order to really talk to that person and move their mind a little bit? Or is it just going to be that you're going to send an enraged tweet and feel like, well, good, I've done my bit for justice? And I heard that wonderful term the other day, slacktivism. That I think is, Andrew was not engaging in slacktivism. Andrew was really putting his whole heart into that conversation, and I'm so grateful to him that he did. So it's an awkward thing to try to say to people. I would never say let prejudice go. You should never, I don't think, let a prejudiced idea go. But I think there's a skill that you can develop where you stand up to the idea and reach the person. At least people did that for me. I'm really grateful that they did.
I can't resist the thought experiment, if we had all the Democratic candidates for president sitting in this forum, of what you might suggest to them about how to talk differently to voters in Idaho or any of the other places where you feel like that the caricature and the cartoon version has more power than it should.
It's a weird thing. I'm not worried about the candidates. I think the candidates will do their focus groups and they'll figure out what they need to say. But I think the party as a whole, I worry about.
Okay.
I worry that how do I say it? I worry that we've lost our tolerance for ideological difference. And I look at the Republican Party, which has so many problems, but you can be a Republican and you can hold a lot of different views. You can be economically conservative, you can be socially conservative, you can be economically liberal, it's an ideologically big tent party at the moment. And the Democrats I worry about because they're not, actually. They're varying degrees of the same thing. And I happen to agree with a lot of the things they think. But I worry about a political party that you can't join if you believe that life begins at conception. I worry about a party, and like I said, I'm pro women's right to choose, but I worry about a party that becomes ideologically puritanical, where we can't say to someone, oh, okay, you don't like gun control, but welcome. Like, we agree about other things that are important, so come on in. I worry about that kind of losing that intellectual diversity because, number one, I think you'll just lose full stop. That's one reason to worry, actually. But the other thing is just, I think healthy debate is good, and that skill to talk to people you disagree with, and not on Twitter, but like talk to them physically in the room, is it's one of the things I think of as what education is. Really, should be the ability. I like to say, I think education should be somewhat more associated with inquiry than with certainty. And I don't know if that's really the message that we send about it right now. Like, you're supposed to get educated and you know things and you can impart your wisdom to the ignorant masses. And I feel like my idea of an educated person is more someone who has the flexibility of mind to see the world from multiple points of view and the desire to see the world from multiple points of view. Not that you lose your own opinions and don't know what you think, but that you can see the full complexity of a person and why they think what they think, and that will make you a better soldier for the things that you believe in.
I'm going to throw this open to you. And so there are mics around the forum. As always, the priority for asking questions goes to the students first. And I would particularly invite first-year students. As you know, the common reading for this year's incoming class was Educated. And I'm curious about what you would hope if you were an entering freshman at Harvard, what they might have taken away or apply lessons from this book to their inquiry and spirit of inquiry here.
Sorry, I missed that. What are you asking?
If you were one of them, if you were a first year here,
Then
and you had read this book over the summer, what would you hope that they had taken away from it? Yeah, it's a little bit of time
wait,
travel.
if I were a first year, if I were a first year student and I had read my own book, what would I want me to take away from it?
Yeah, that.
That's like some Nicene Creed. Like I'm
Yeah.
not even. There are 5 people who got that joke. That was a philosophy nerd joke. I don't even know. I don't understand that question, but I admire it. What would I want? You know, the thing is, I wrote the book to be an experience, and the thing about experiences is that multiple people can have the same experience, and they come to totally different conclusions. And so people read my book, and they come to all different they get all kinds of funny ideas about. I have some people come up to me in an event and say, you know, I'm so glad that you're never going to see, you never have to worry about your family again, and that's all settled. And then the next person in line will say, I just know reconciliation is right around the corner. And in both cases, I just smile and I shake their hand and I just know this has nothing to do with me.
Right.
Like this is, and I think that's what stories are. You take them and you judge them in a nice way. I hope. I mean, I'll leave at the back, but I think you use them. You think, well, she made this choice and I made a different choice. And what do I think about the choice she made? And what do I think about the choice I made, and you use them to kind of work out what you think about your own life. And so I think when you write a book and you realize you're talking to someone and that they are talking about your mother, but they're really talking about their father, you know, that's storytelling, and it's great. I think it's really wonderful. It's disorienting for me, but it's really great. So I never tell anybody what to take out of the book. I have all my weird things that I say about education, and I want everybody to talk to people they disagree with, and blah, 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 blah. I got my own stuff. But I know the book is, you know, do what you will, really. It's not my business. I'm out.
Okay. The floor is yours. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Meena Venkataramanan, and I'm a junior at the college studying English literature. Thank you so much for being here today. I was so moved by your memoir, and I'm in a memoir writing class at the moment, and one thing we discuss is the process of scene making, or imbuing work of literature with details that really paint the scene for the readers. And I wanted to ask you about your scene-making process, especially since you relied on diaries. How did you negotiate the scene-making process by which you were able to incorporate details from your life, but at the same time operating with the genre of nonfiction, ensuring that that was corroborated by other people in your family, or that was something that could be attested to by others, to really institutionalize it as nonfiction?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot in that. I kind of wrote my chapters to be short stories. That was helpful because it helped me thematically organize the material, so I knew every chapter was going to have its own arc, and that was really helpful. You know, the memoir thing is a funny one. I have a lot of dialogue in my book, but the way that I handled that, just knowing that memories are pretty imperfect, is I think usually you have a conversation with somebody, you're not going to remember all of it, but if it's an important conversation, you're going to remember. There are parts of it you're going to remember very well because they were the important parts to you. So usually if it's an important conversation, the stuff I was recording is the stuff I really remembered, or I had a journal entry about it. And then there's a lot of dialogue that I use that is, if I'm honest, did my dad say that exact thing in that exact moment? I don't know, but the nice thing about my dad is that he never said anything once. He said most things at least 5,000 times. So a lot of the stuff from my dad that isn't in it, but you know, it's like, did he say it that exact morning? No, but he said it every morning. Like one of my brothers once said to me, we were driving along, and he said, you know, I don't remember Dad getting too worked up about Y2K. And I said, and there was a kind of long pause, and he said, but come to think of it, it's kind of hard to imagine him not getting worked up about it. And I thought, sure. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's a mix of the things you remember, the things that other people remember, and kind of the general truths that you know about people, and you kind of weave it together. I sense-checked what I wrote a lot with family members. But the scene setting, the basic tricks to scene setting are old and universal, which is as much as you possibly can, put people in a moment. You know, the summer, that it was generally kind of warm that summer, and we were all hanging out at the lake a lot, and there was a lot of picnics. That's boring. But, you know, it was Tuesday evening, and Sarah was in the water, and Jason didn't know where she was. Like, you are somewhere, and you can be in a moment. So that's generally what you want to do.
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Daniela. I'm a first year here at the college. And one anecdote in the book that really stuck with me was that in your first year at college, you went into class and you didn't know what the Holocaust was and what that meant. And so I guess my question for you is, how do you think that college campuses can be more inclusive to a variety of backgrounds in the classroom specifically?
And so I think that that's important with religion and political views and ethnicity and income, I think, is one that we leave out a lot. And so I think that you have to have a true diversity. But the other part of that is just to, I know I'm beating this horse to death, but I think to try to remember what you're seeing about a person in a moment when they say something objectionable, that's not their whole story. You know, their whole culmination of their life was not this moment that they've said something that offends you. And so it's worth thinking about, if they've said something harmful to another group, you want to stand up to that and you want to deal with it. But then you also want to deal with that person and realize that so much of what we see of other people, we see so little of their actual lives, and people are rich and complicated, and I would dare say a lot of people would have met me when I went to Cambridge and would have found me objectionable in every way, and they would have been right in a lot of ways. You know, I was working on it. And I am just really grateful for the people who were willing to say, you're wrong about so many things, but you know, you're here and you're trying, and we're going to make allowances, and we're gonna work through it. So I think that relentless unwillingness to reduce people to one thing about them is pretty important.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm a sophomore here, and first, thanks for writing your book. It's like meant a lot to me. I was wondering how you find the vigilance to untangle your personal narrative and just like your experiences in general. Like if I agree that life is like very complex and messy, and people are too, but like if you don't have like 30 journals, or if like when you're dealing with like either your personal experiences or just like life, like how do you make sense of the messiness?
How do you make sense of it? I mean, I don't know if what's coming to my mind right now, I'm not even sure it's the answer to your question, but I feel like one of the things that people struggle a lot when they write their own stories is that it's very difficult to time travel. And it's actually one of the hardest things is to go back and write the early part of the story as if you didn't know the end when you do know the end. And so I found when I was early drafts of my memoir, I had a lot of unresolved feelings about my mother. And I would write stories about her that were kind of a little harsh on her, actually, at a time where it didn't belong, actually. And she was different when I was younger. And it was hard for me not to let the fact that I knew how that ended color the whole thing. And same way when I talk about my own ignorance, it'd be very easy for me to try to write the story and say, oh, you know, my family, we had these very prejudiced ideas, but I never did. I mean, I was very perfect. But that's not true. That's not true. And I think if you you have to do the best that you can to be honest with yourself and go back to the way things were and try to clear away all the knowledge. I think one of the hardest things I used to say this about, I think what's hard about writing fiction is creating enough details that the world feels real. And what's hard about memoir is clearing away all of the clutter so that you have a story and not just a bunch of stuff that you remember. So they have kind of the opposite problem. And I think you really want to delete the knowledge that you have when you're writing a memoir. You're not trying to get more. Like in fiction, you want to see more. What's this person's backstory? What's the setting? What was that lake like? You want to delete everything. Delete what came after. You know how it ends, but you have to try to get back to so you don't. And that's what story is. You will change. Your character has to change. And if you can't remember a time when you were not who you are now, then you can't have change. And when other people weren't who they are now.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm a student here as well. I mean, you've taken such a sort of act of bravery to be vulnerable. I mean, and balancing with obviously all the opportunity you've been given through it.
Oh, thanks.
Have you thought through, given what you want to do next, if you have thought about that, did you kind of think through that risk of how does this play into that? How do you want to follow up? Or is it something, you didn't really think about? You're kind of just waiting to see how life takes you on that. But I'm just curious how you kind of thought about that, tackling that risk.
It's a really good question. I don't have a good answer to it. We'll see. I mean, memoirists have a kind of long, proud tradition, and there's exceptions to this, but they have a long, proud tradition of having one really big book, and then they, you don't really hear from them again. So, we'll see. I have other stuff I want to do. I don't know if I'll be any good at it. I don't think I want to write any more memoirs. I want to write some stuff about estrangement. I'm interested in it, and I wish that I'd had something to read about it when I was going through it. And so I want to do that. So you might see that. And I have a pervasive, maybe even unhealthy interest in the rural U.S. and a kind of storytelling about the rural U.S. that I feel like we're missing. And I don't want to scrub it clean. I don't want to pretend like there aren't problems there and that there aren't problematic views there. There are. So I wouldn't want to write about it and say, oh, don't worry, everything's just basically Mayberry, everything's fine. That's not the goal, but I would want to show just that complicated fact, that there are people that maybe they don't have the right view, but there's more to them than that. And if I remain deeply, deeply convinced, I have a brother that I love really dearly, and we've disagreed on many, many issues. We disagreed on gay marriage really deeply, and he adopted 3 kids who really needed quite a lot of help. And I'm not in a position to say I'm a better person than he is. Like, I'm objectively, like, the votes are in, and that is like the nicest, that's what I think of as the ultimate act of charity. And so I feel like there's a view that you have that I disagree with, and if ever I felt like we've argued about it, and I think he's changed quite a lot. And I guess what I'm saying is I'm interested in those kinds of issues, but how that will play out is anybody's guess, and it might be that the book will just shout louder than me for the rest of my life. So I'm pretty loud though, so you never know.
Hi, I'm a junior at the college. Thank you for being here. I was wondering how you went about filling that role of unconditional love and care that family typically plays for a lot of people.
It's a good question. I think it's a process of life building. You have the family that you're given, and ideally that works out. And then if you have to make hard decisions about that family, then you got to do the work of building another family. And I have some of my original family. I have cousins I'm really close to. I have 3 of my brothers I'm really close to. I have aunts I'm really close to. That's probably the core of it. And then I've got a dog, and who's actually, that sounds like a sarcastic thing, but he's actually really great. And really good friends. And you learn to, I think, get in touch with yourself a little bit and pay attention. What friends do I have that when I'm with them, they feel like family? And what friends do I have that don't feel that way? And I will spend more time with those ones.
My name is Vishal. I'm studying education policy at the education school. So I was was quite curious about how we can interact with you a lot more. Like, would you be doing workshops, seminars, office hours? Is there ways, like, apart from just forums like these?
I'm teaching the weirdest workshop ever on Thursday, and it's about rhetorical devices and Paul Simon. So that should be fun. I don't have office hours. But yeah, that workshop is probably the best way. And then I'll hang around for a bit after if anybody wants to chit-chat about things. So if you're able to come to that, I'll see you then.
My name's Palace, and I'm a first-year student. I was wondering how you determine if a risk is worth taking, and if there's still a place for religion and faith in your life today.
Faith is a funny one. Formalized religion is an interest of mine, but I'm not Mormon, and I haven't ever replaced those beliefs with any other kind of formalized religion. But faith, I think, faith that comes up a lot in my book, actually, and not just as a Mormon faith, but I think faith is one of those things that is, there's a Mormon scripture that I really, really like that talks about how faith is the belief in a better world. And then, of course, the Bible, as Matthew has that scripture that I really love a lot. I think it's 1:11, but it might be 11:1. One of them is about a dog. It's not that one. It says that if you have faith is the evidence of things not seen, the things hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen. And I guess it's funny. I think education and faith actually have a lot in common in that sense. When I think about what education is, and reading stories that are not your story, and I learned about the civil rights movement in college. I never heard of it, and here were these experiences, and they were totally different than mine. And it was my country, but it was not the country I recognized, and yet clearly valid experiences. And that opened my mind, a different way of seeing the world, different way of seeing my world. And that moved on to other groups of people and other experiences and other lives, and you start to think, well, if there are other lives possible, then there are other versions of my life that are possible. And so I think faith and education kind of share that weirdly. They're the evidence of things you haven't seen yourself personally. You're reading about it. You're opening your mind to other people telling you things. And so I think in that way, faith plays a pretty big part. There's what I think of as kind of a pivotal, or maybe the pivotal moment of my book, and I've lost my faith in a technical sense, and I'm making a decision whether I'm going to leave my family and embark on a life that, to me at the time was pretty much unimaginable. It was impossible for me to imagine a life that I would want that wouldn't have my family in it. I did not have the headspace for that, but I decided that I would, I could almost imagine that might exist, and it was a risk I took, and I'm glad that I took it. But I think that act when I left that night was some combination of faith and learning and imagination.
Hi, my name is Jen. I work here at the Kennedy School, and a scene that really resonated me with in the book was when you were brought to the roof of the chapel and you were climbing and you were just in your element. And that led me to want to ask you, when and how did you learn to believe in yourself?
You get a little better at it, and then you get a little worse, and then you get a little better. I don't know. I don't have a perfect answer for that. I feel like there were voices in my head that were not mine, that I'd grown up with, that told me what I could do, what I was supposed to be like, or what my skills were, or what my value was. And those voices, the problem with them is that they felt like they were mine. Like I recognized them. They'd been with me a long time. And I think part of what I learned I had these professors all of a sudden in my life telling me very different things, and that was really hard for me to believe because I had these other things that felt a lot truer. And I think part of growing up and part of working on mental health and all the rest of it is finding those voices and kind of observing them and thinking about how accurate they are. And that took me a really long time. That was not a quick process. And I still work on it. I think there's so much value in being aware of your thoughts and being a little bit skeptical of your thoughts and where are you taking me? Like, where are we going? Because we all have, I think, voices in our heads that are not our voices. They didn't come from us, and it's not short work, but it's worth doing.
Do you remember the first time someone told you you were smart?
It might have been either Professor Carey or Professor Steinberg. It was probably Professor Steinberg. I probably had some professors that kind of said it, and I did that thing that a lot of people do where I just discounted it. You know, they said, "Oh, you're one of my better students." I was like, "Yeah, you think that, but it's just because I don't know what I thought." You find ways to discount it. But these two professors were relentless. It's like they were holding me in place and forcing me to hear nice things about myself, and that was very painful at the time. Now I love it. It's fine.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciated your book. My name is Nick. I'm a senior at the college. And this question's actually from, it's phoned in from a man named Ryan. And so Ryan was wondering, and
did your friend have a dream about your other?
Exactly. So me and Ryan and hopefully other people in the room were wondering how elite institutions like this can work to effectively recruit and retain students and talent from rural America and support students in ways that they support students from other diverse backgrounds in the United States.
Yeah. That's a big one. I mean, I think they have to mean it. You know, they have to do it. And I don't think it's necessarily that hard or impossible to do, but it just requires an outlay of resources, and not just to get them here, but once they're here to really, really support them. And I think that it's one of those things where you almost need a critical enough mass of people who don't fit the typical profile, that the institution itself has to change a little bit. And not just that the students have to change so they fit the institution, but you say to yourself, okay, we're going to be a school, and we're going to be the kind of school that educates all different kinds of people from all different kinds of background, and that means that we have to change. They don't have to change to fit us. It's not about teaching them how to be a Harvard student. We need to learn how to be the kind of school that is able to educate a diversity of people. And that is not a way that I am convinced most of the Ivy League are thinking about the problem. I think they're thinking, how do we make them like us? And I think, well, how do you become more like them? That would be my question.
Yeah.
My question was, having had to change a lot of your fundamental beliefs through discussions with compassionate people like Andrew, who you were talking about earlier, do you think that has made you more persuasive in terms of talking to other people that you might disagree with? And my other question is, being in college, sometimes it can feel a bit like an echo chamber. So how do you surround yourself with people with different ideas?
Well, I'm lucky in that way because I have, I think, 64 cousins. And I disagree with none. I mean, I agree with none of them. So that's handy. And I like all of them very much. So that's really useful. And I think well of them. And I think better of a lot of them than I think of myself. So anytime I feel like, well, I'm a better person because I have the right way of thinking about things, I remember, well, there's other ways to have value, and they volunteer a lot more than I do and do a lot more. So they give up a lot of their time. So I guess I hope it's made me more persuasive. I don't know, real evidence is lacking, but I hope so. I think your other point, though, your second point is so important, which is that I think education really ought to be access to a lot of different points of view, and you really ought to be meeting people who are totally different from you. And the problem we have increasingly is that people are segregating in all these ways. They're segregating by race, they're segregating by belief. You pretty much live with people who are in your same socioeconomic bracket, and your parents have the same kind of jobs, and we all live with people who are almost exactly like us. And then our schools, because schools are geographically based usually, schools then become echo chambers in a weird way that I think is the opposite of what a school should be. So that's a real problem, I would say. And I don't have a perfect answer. To it, but I think seeking out those people and meaningful relationships with those people, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges of the future, because we're moving into a place where people are so physically separated from each other, where the only interaction people have with people not in their same socioeconomic group are people who work for them or who drive the Uber that they're in. You know, it's a front and back of the car division. And then the ideas that we have about people not like us are from the internet, so that's terrifying. I mean, I have a weird experience moving around in New York where, you know, it's like because I've been to Idaho, people are like, District 9, what's it like there? You know, and it's just insane, actually. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that's going to be the problem you have to solve, is how do I have a meaningful relationship with someone who's not like me? And am I going to ask my Uber driver how his day was? And is that what that looks like? Where on the spectrum of going out to dinner and going to movies with someone and having someone integrate into your life and being kind to them as they pick up your dry cleaning, like where are you gonna deal with that? And that's a class problem. We don't really have a language of class in this country, but we need one, because we live in a highly stratified society by class, and we have no language to talk about it. We have less social mobility in the United States than Canada, than the UK, and they have a lot of class but issues. They have a whole set of problems around it, but they can talk about it, and they have greater social mobility than we do. So I think I don't have a solution for you, because mine is built in, but I think if you're talking about empathy and you're talking about understanding and you're talking about persuasion and you're talking about, that's the problem. How do we reintegrate? And I think from a policy perspective, a good place to start would probably be zoning laws. And this is something liberals are really quite bad at, where they often don't want low-income housing built anywhere near where they are. And I would say we've reached kind of the end of the era where we think we can put all the poor people here and all the rich people here and we'll have social mobility. That's not going to happen. So integration, it's going to burn a little. You know, you should just go with it.
I think that set of challenges of seeking out difference and seeking out complexity is an excellent place for us to end. And thank you so much, Tara, for what you have brought to us.
Thank you.